people who can summarize any subject in 14.5 seconds, and gentlemen, I've detected another kook, a Miss Zeitgeist, who I will refer to as Z from this point on. Miss Zeitgeist, a real spammer and Marxist extraordinaire. One thing I should mention at the beginning is she will come on strong at the start of a debate, but I found out as soon as enough people push back at her, she abandons ship. Shortly after I heard her blathering about peak oil on the Quarta of Larry channel, I challenged her, which led to her making several comments on my channel and a few on a couple of my videos. You'll see the screenshots going by. It wasn't too long before she was claiming to be working and would get back to me soon and humiliate me in front of all my YouTube friends. That never materialized, but she still persists, hitting channel after channel on a daily basis. She's a hit-and-run Marxist whose ideas require your money being taken by force. I'll start with the dropping she left on my channel pertaining to peak oil. She says, peak oil is real. Quote, peak oil is real and has not been debunked. It is hard to say when we reached peak. Some say it was 2005, some say it is now, but it is real. End quote. It would be difficult to prove peak oil, even if it is true at this point. Have we extensively explored every nook and cranny of this planet? This hypothesis also relies on the belief that recovery rates won't rise significantly. They have in the last 40-some years. And it also assumes technology is static. Both are gratuitous assumptions. Then she says, we do know that, quote, we do know that Saudi Arabia is past peak. They are pumping seawater in their 2 mega fields to extract oil faster. Europe and Asia are almost dry right now. M.K. Hubbard was right about the USA hitting peak in 1970 when everyone else was wrong, and he predicted this back in 1956. All the people that try to debunk peak oil do so by pointing to non-conventional petroleum, oil shale, tar sands, etc. Okay, where's the energy to refine those going to come from? Well, I could do it like you and just say it'll come from somebody's pocket. Almost all of it comes from natural gas, which is also dwindling in supply, and these kooks want to turn a clean form of energy into a dirty one, end quote. I guess she's been channeling Nancy Pelosi. Natural gas is cleaner than coal and oil, but it's still a fossil fuel. Does she think natural gas is an alternative energy source? She also apparently is pushing a peak natural gas hypothesis. Let's deal with peak oil first. She apparently doesn't know when we supposedly hit peak oil, saying some say it happened in 2005, some say it's 2010, but it's real. It's really real, and if you don't believe it, she'll say it again. The problem is twofold. One, proven crude oil reserves in the world have gone up in the following fashion. 1980, it was almost 645 billion barrels. 1990, just over 1 trillion barrels. 2000, 1.016 trillion. 2005, 1.277 trillion. 2009, 1.342 trillion. Africa's proven reserves have more than doubled since 1990. Her argument is not on solid ground. Stating that we're seeing declines in Saudi Arabia, a common peak oiler talking point along with the North Sea, misses the big picture. Those aren't the only areas that are being tapped, and many areas are being explored today that were not being explored decades ago. Her and her ilk have made many a declaration about peak oil in the last 100 years. Their track record is worse than the Jehovah's Witnesses predicting Jesus' return. Jimmy Carter's administration predicted that by the end of the 1980s we'd hit peak oil. The Club of Rome predicted that by 2000 it would be a reality. In 1914 and 1939, peak oil was supposed to be less than 15 years away. Kenneth Watt predicted peak oil would hit by 2000. These peak oiler pukes are just a derivative of the Malthusian camp, those like Paul Ehrlich, who predict the apocalypse every 5 to 10 years to keep everyone scared. When their predictions fail, they do it again, hoping everyone didn't realize the last 6 times they were wrong. Matt Simmons' predictions back in 2005 concerning the price of crude oil in 2010 were way off. In 5 years, he'll be wringing his hands, making the same apocalyptic predictions again. Due to rising recovery rates, many areas that were thought to be dry, like Kern River Formation in California, were reopened and are producing again. Now let's deal with Z's arguments pertaining to energy return on investment. She has to assume there will be no technological advances made, and also forgets to factor in the price of oil into the equation. As crude oil becomes more expensive, whether it be actual supply and demand, or geopolitical events in the Middle East, or monetary missteps, exploring for shale oil will become more profitable. Private sector angel investors and oil companies will determine if shale oil is a worthwhile endeavor or not, or at least they should. It should also be noted that at one point Z told me energy exploration in shale should be banned. This is a stunning admission, just in case her recycled James Kunstler-esque arguments don't work. We'll just ban it, dang it. Sounds like a fairness doctrine to me. She also fails to grasp the fact that energy exploration has advanced markedly over the last half century. Look at all the advances we made in the areas of manufacturing and healthcare. In my video on free trade, I illustrated the massive efficiency advances we made in the arena of manufacturing the last 60 years. Agriculture has advanced as well. We produce a lot more food today than we did 80 years ago, and we're doing it with a lot less farmers. Healthcare has made similar advances. I'll read off a few of them. Neonatal mortality was cut by 2/3 between 1970 and 2005. Fetal mortality rate, miscarriage, was cut by more than half in the same time period. Life expectancy went up about 7 years. Depression is far more treatable. Fertility treatments are greatly advanced. Gastric bypass surgery is now available for the morbidly obese like Michael Moore and Rosie O'Donnell. Reconstructive surgery is greatly advanced. LASIK eye surgery was invented. We have vaccines for rubella, pneumonia, hepatitis A and B, chickenpox, Lyme disease, meningitis, smallpox was eradicated. We've got all these wonderful MRIs, PET scans, etc. Healthcare has advanced massively, and we've seen the same in energy exploration, and I think it will continue. Her point that we're running out of natural gas, too, is laughable, horribly laughable. This country has an abundance of energy, including natural gas. According to data just released by the EIA, natural gas production in the U.S. reached an annual record high of 26.85 trillion cubic feet in 2010. That output was an increase of 3.22% above the previous record high last year, which pushed U.S. production in 2009 above Russia's, and made the U.S. the #1 producer of natural gas in the world. On a monthly basis, natural gas production in December surged to 2.386 trillion cubic feet, which was almost 9% above the year-ago level, and set a new all-time record for the most gas ever produced in a single month, not counting the gas produced in Washington. The record high level of production in 2010 and record monthly output in December helped drive the average residential gas price for the month of December down to $9.86 per 1,000 cubic feet, the lowest monthly average since February 2004. In its latest outlook, the EIA saw U.S. production increasing by 0.8% this year, while deliveries to consumers are expected to rise by 0.3%. For consumers, that means cheaper electricity prices and inexpensive gas for heating and cooking in homes and businesses. The American Petroleum Institute reports that the U.S. produced more crude oil in October than it has ever produced in a single month. This reversal of trend helps explain why U.S. domestic production for the year will be 140,000 barrels a day higher than last year, which was 410,000 barrels a day higher than 2008. Except you put in the de facto oil drilling moratorium by Obama, and it's probably going to fall this year. But that's government intervention there, government interference. With rising production from shale fields, the U.S. surpassed Russia last year to become the world's largest supplier of natural gas. Shale now accounts for 10% of the country's natural gas production, up from 2% in 1990. Chesapeake Energy's production from its next Texas project, expected by the end of 2012, will by itself supply the energy equivalent of 500,000 barrels of oil a day. The EIA reports that the country's proven reserves of crude rose last year by 9% to 22.3 billion barrels. For natural gas, the U.S. has the 4 largest fields in the world. The EIA reports that proven U.S. reserves of natural gas increased last year by 11% to 284 trillion cubic feet, the highest level since 1971. Undiscovered technically recoverable oil in the United States is 145.5 billion barrels, and undiscovered technically recoverable natural gas is 1,162.7 trillion cubic feet. The demonstrated reserve base for coal is 489 billion short tons, of which 262 billion short tons are considered technically recoverable. Because the United States produces and consumes about 1.2 billion short tons of coal per year, the demonstrated reserve base would appear to provide hundreds of years' supply of coal if U.S. users were to continue to consume it at the same rate. In addition to natural gas and shale formations, the DOE conservatively estimates that oil shale reserves in Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming contain 800 billion barrels of recoverable oil, more than three times the proven reserves of Saudi Arabia. And remember what I said about the price of oil, etc. at the start of this section. Another comment this clown made that dovetailed with our energy discussion was, quote, "Here is something that has bipartisan support. Tax the bleep out of market speculators," unquote. No references provided to show that this has bipartisan support. I assume she polled her mentally deficient family and concluded that speaks for America. And her argument is fatally flawed. Going back to my discussion of natural gas, prices there are going down to historical lows. Speculators aren't doing their job, evidently, in natural gas futures. Crude oil prices from 1982 on, after we got our monetary policy corrected by Volcker and Reagan, were falling, adjusted for inflation. Speculators are just a convenient scapegoat for the uneducated. They didn't start rocketing up again, oil prices that is, until our monetary policy loosened shortly after 9/11. Funny how she leaves that out, monetary policy. Will taking speculators out of the loop cure this problem? Onions are one of the few commodities in the U.S. for which there are no futures markets, according to an item published, and this was back in 2008, in Fortune magazine. Futures markets allow the sale of commodities for set prices at future dates. It seems that in the late 1950s, domestic onion producers blamed those same speculators in futures markets for driving onion prices down. They successfully lobbied Congress to ban all futures trading in onions, a ban that is still in place a half-century later. And yet, even with no traders to blame, the volatility in onion prices makes the swings in oil and corn look tame, reinforcing academics' belief that futures trading diminishes extreme price swings. Since 2006, oil prices have risen 100% and corn is up 300%, but onion prices soared 400% between October 2006 and April 2007, when weather reduced crops, according to the Department of Agriculture, only to crash again by 96% by March 2008 on overproduction, and then rebound 300% by April of 2008. No speculators to blame, and price volatility persists. Who are you going to blame now? So, no speculation in onion prices, yet it's all over the map. The price swings were massive. Crude oil prices from 1982 on until about 2001 were extremely tame. The speculators weren't doing their job there either, I guess. Here's the next Z Cannard. Quote, "This is something people need to know about. Carter in the 70s had an energy plan that addressed this, and he had a plan that would have us getting 25% of our energy from renewables, solar and wind by 2000, and 50% by 2010. Yeah, that big of a jump. And Reagan scrapped it and gave more money and drilling to coal and oil. Because of this, we are having high gas prices, and that means higher food prices, because oil and natural gas is used in our food production," end quote. Of course, again, she leaves out the fact that oil prices from 1983 until just a couple years ago were relatively tame. So, yeah, I guess Reagan's doing his job now several decades later, ruining it. I've already addressed ethanol in an article on my website and a video too. Check the link underneath the video. Ethanol is a money hole and a major net energy loser, even with massive subsidies. I'll state again, I wish the federal government would get rid of all subsidies for energy. She might respond, "You're saying the same thing about ethanol that I'm saying about unconventional sources of oil." Problem is, ethanol and renewables, and this includes solar and wind energy, have not advanced nearly as much as the oil industry, and they receive far more subsidies than those industries do. Ethanol, along with horrible Federal Reserve policies, something Z never mentioned to me, are contributing to the rising price of food. Inflation is a monetary phenomenon, Z. It's time you learned that. Wind power is a joke, and I've also addressed that in a video. Its capacity value is low and subject to wild swings. It's unpredictable. Tax credits for ethanol have been around for over 3 decades. The 10% mandate has been in effect for 17 years. Time to cut it off from the taxpayer teat. Wind power subsidies are also a complete waste of money. If you think wind energy is the answer, it must be a pretty dumb question. And on to our last topic. Z also has an obsession with eliminating the cap on payroll taxes so it's fairer. It's just not fair that the rich guy down the street from her hovel pays 0% into Social Security after $106,800. Note, she doesn't apply this reasoning to personal or corporate income taxes. She thinks eliminating that cap will save a government program doomed by demographics. The following comments were made on one of my videos where the topic was government inefficiency, specifically the federal Head Start program. She never attempted to defend Head Start. Remember, she doesn't apply this reasoning to personal and corporate income taxes. She wouldn't go for a flat tax there. No way. Specifically, I focused on the federal failure known as Head Start. She never offered any comments on that. Let's dissect her rants on Social Security. First, I never got an answer out of her pertaining to where this massive redistribution of wealth is condoned by the U.S. Constitution. Second, these payroll taxes have been raised and raised and raised umpteen times since Social Security became a reality, yet it's still insolvent. Third, the government already isn't keeping its promise because by 2037, retirees are going to see their benefits cut. Social Security will have a surplus of Treasury IOUs of $4.6 trillion by 2023, but notwithstanding the T attached to that sum, all's not well. By 2023, the program's net liabilities will exceed $20 trillion. The fact that Social Security will be able to pay 75% of scheduled benefits after 2037 means we would have to impose a 25% benefit cut at that time if no adjustments are made earlier. It's said that the natural human instinct for justice emanates from a simple thought experiment of placing oneself in the shoes of the victims. In this case, it's those poor future souls who would have to acquiesce to a 25% benefit cut. If we go out to 2014 through 2083, the unfunded liability for Social Security on our current trajectory is $27.2 trillion adjusted for inflation. Demographics are dooming it too. In reality, our money, rather than being invested and kept in an actual trust fund, is immediately given to current retirees and Social Security benefits or to the healthcare providers and Medicare benefits. The government's promise to pay for your retirement pension and medical care is just a promise and a lie. In theory, the promise could be kept by raising taxes on future workers, but there won't be enough of them. Changing demographics are destroying the programs. A large working class can support a relatively small retired class, especially when life expectancy is 61 years and benefits don't begin until 65. That's how things were in the early years of Social Security. But when life expectancy grows to 80 and a large generational gap, the baby boomers, retires expecting to be supported by a far smaller working class, that's trouble. 10 years after Social Security passed, in 1935 there were almost 42 workers for each retiree. 5 years later, the ratio slipped to about 17 to 1. Now it's about 3.4 to 1. 30 years from now, it's around 2035 actually, it's projected to be 2 to 1. Think of the burden on those 2 or 3 workers who will have to support one retiree for 15 to 20 years. The government has no legal obligation to make good on its promises. Twice the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Americans have no contractual rights regarding Social Security benefits. In 1960, Fleming versus Nestor, the court said, quote, to engraft upon the Social Security system a concept of accrued property rights would deprive it of the flexibility and boldness in adjustment to ever-changing conditions. which it demands, end quote. Get that? You have no accrued property rights under Social Security. It's a welfare program that exists at the politicians' pleasure. And eliminating the cap on that, then they'll be bitching for money, more money 10 years from now, and then they'll want their VAT tax, and they'll get that. They'll get their value-added tax, and then they'll be bitching for money. They'll be complaining that they're out of money 10, 15 years from now. It's an endless cycle. We're getting screwed. I asked Z repeatedly, since the payroll tax taken out of my paycheck is allegedly saved for me when I retire, why can't I opt out of it now and do it myself? I'd have my house paid off by now if it weren't for those taxes. But it's not being done that way. It's a Ponzi scheme. My payroll taxes are being put in Grandpa's wallet, not in a lockbox for the day I retire. This reinforces my belief that all liberal ideas require someone else's money by force, and all of Z's schemes require confiscation and redistribution of wealth. Maybe this tinfoil hat-wearing troglodyte can't save for her own retirement, needs some Marxist in Washington to hold her hand, but I don't. I'm utterly confident that I can do it myself without the help of Washington. What Z wants, basically, you have to pay for her retirement. That's what she wants. And if she gets back to me, maybe I'll upload a part 2. So if you want to, Z, just bring it. Have a nice day.